Hey, everybody. I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. George Jessel said, "The human brain starts working the moment you are born and never stops until you stand up to speak in public." Well, on today's episode, we talk about spontaneous speaking, techniques to manage public speaking anxiety, maximizing mediocrity, giving feedback that doesn't flop, and more. My guest is a husband and father, a leading expert in the field of communication, and a lecturer in organizational behavior at Stanford University. He's a sought-after keynote speaker, author, communication consultant and coach, and host of the award-winning podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. He's helped countless presenters improve and hone their communication, including some who have delivered IPO roadshows, as well as TED, World Economic Forum, and Nobel Prize presentations. Please welcome the man who's helping us speak successfully when we're on the spot without freaking out, Matt Abrahams. Matt, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here, Jay. Really excited for our conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely, as am I. And, I need to share with you that researching you and consuming your content and reading your book has been just an incredible experience for me. You're so insightful and you truly help me out in a number of ways. So I know this is going to be a meaningful conversation for our audience. So let's dive right in. So, Matt, there are moments that can define us, that can often change the course of our lives. Could you share with us what one of those moments have been for you?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you've taken value from my work, Jay. There have been several, but perhaps the one that you might be thinking about is one that really did change the trajectory of my life. When I was a freshman in high school, very first day of class, Mr. Meredith, our English teacher, had each of us stand up and share what we did that summer, a ritual that happens in classrooms all over. And at the end of the day, end of the class, he came to me and said, "You're really good at this talking thing." Those were his words. And each teacher, English teacher, had been told that they had to nominate one student to go to a speech competition the coming Saturday. And I was his choice. So he said, "Saturday, I need you to go give a presentation, represent my classes." And being a freshman, first day of high school, I said, "Yes, sir, I'll do that." So early that Saturday morning, 7:30 in the morning, here I am dressed in a suit that's too tight, and certainly I'd grown since the last time I'd worn it. So you can see my socks, my tie is too tight. My father had to tie it for me. I walk into this room and quite nervous about giving a presentation. There are my friends, the girl I liked, the parents of my friends who are judging this competition, and I'm set to go. And I'm delivering a speech on karate, because the one bit of advice Mr. Meredith said is, give a presentation on something you're passionate about and do something that'll get their attention at the beginning. So you can see where this is going. I start my speech with a karate kick, but I was so nervous, I forgot to put on my special karate pants that have a little extra room, and I ripped my pants from zipper to belt buckle in the first 10 seconds of a 10-minute speech. And I learned in that moment just the impact anxiety can have on our ability to communicate. And from that moment on, I've been fascinated by anxiety and communication, and I've worked hard through the academic research I've done, the coaching, the teaching that I do, to try to help people feel a little more confident and comfortable than I did that very cold, early Saturday morning.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that story, the way that you painted the visual for us. You're a great storyteller.
Well, thank
And I would love it if you would share the rest of that story with us. So after the pants rip,
you.
did you finish the speech, and how did you
Yes.
do in the competition?
So what happened immediately is, everybody knew. It was so loud. I can still hear the sound reverberating in my mind. There was another teacher from my high school who was there. She was chaperoning all of us. And she, without missing a beat, a true high school teacher who's seen it all, she takes her sweater, throws it to me while I'm speaking. I wrap it around my waist. I finish the presentation. And I think strictly out of pity and surprise that I was able to finish the presentation, I won the tournament. But it's one of those things where I didn't brag about it or say much about it because I didn't want everybody to know what had happened. So I actually did very well. I don't think it's because of the quality of my speaking. I think it was mostly that I got through it with a ripped pants.
I love that. And such a great story to be able to share with many others throughout your life. So, so there you
Yes.
go.
Yes. Well, it does give me the opportunity as a teacher and a coach to say, when people say, oh my goodness, I'm so worried about this happening, I'm like, let me paint a picture of what I've gone through when you can survive too.
Yeah, when we think about the worst thing that could possibly happen,
Yeah,
that one hasn't
that's probably
crossed
on the
my
list.
mind.
Yeah.
Well, it is now.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
certainly is now.
Yeah.
So, speaking of karate kicks, one of the things that you enjoy doing is being in a dojo and practicing the art of karate.
Mhm.
So, is that something that you've been doing since you were a child?
I have studied martial arts for over 40 years. So I started in my early teens. I'm not going to give the exact number of years, but yes, no, I've studied martial arts for a long, long time. And it's a very important part of my life. I enjoy it. It helps me find balance. I learn a lot in the dojo that translates into life, and a lot in life translates into the dojo. And I'm really excited that I just had one of my students, because I still teach as well. He just made his third degree black belt rank just a few days ago. So I love doing it. I love teaching it, and it's been a great help to me.
Outstanding. So I also practiced the martial
Ooh.
arts for a number of years, and
Uh-huh.
my son
Uh-huh.
has, since the time that he was 6 years old,
Wow.
and
Cool.
still practices, and he's 30 now.
Oh, wow.
So, what is it about the martial arts for you that has helped you in both your personal life as well as your professional life?
I love talking with other martial artists, so that's very cool, Jay. We can geek out on the martial arts. So I've learned many lessons. Humility being one of them. The ability to be present, to be focused, to pay attention to subtlety. What's going on around you? What is the other person doing and needing in the moment? So I've learned a lot that translate directly to communication. In the study of martial arts, you study different types of concepts of movement. So there's actual sparring where it's very spontaneous in the moment. There are forms, sometimes called kata, that are pre-described sets of movements, and those translate directly into communication. There's planned communication, there's spontaneous communication, and they each rely on skills from the other to be successful. So I see a lot of corollaries, and in my life, it's just been very grounding and very humbling. Believe me, I get humbled every time I step into the dojo, and that's helpful.
I'll bet you do. And that's one of the greatest gifts that we receive from walking into the dojo. And just for those that are watching and listening right now that may not be aware of the martial arts, had Matt been wearing his gi
Yes.
when he gave that speech when he was a freshman in high school, more than likely he wouldn't have ripped his pants.
Exactly. You are exactly right. I wasn't going to wear my gi bottoms, but I had a pair of pants that had a little more room. And anyway, it's a long story why I didn't do that, but
For sure.
it
Well,
changed my life.
excellent. Very good. Well, thank you for sharing that. So,
Yeah.
you started your professional journey in the tech industry and you held a number of senior leadership roles. How did you transition from the tech industry to becoming a communications instructor and lecturer?
My 10 years in tech is really a side trip in my mission, which is really, I've always been fascinated by communication, and I've studied it in graduate school. I came out of graduate school with a fair amount of debt, and I needed to find a way to pay that down. So I went to work applying my communication skills. So I started as a trainer. I then ended up running learning and development organizations for companies. And it was through that I saw how valuable communication skills are in the wild, in the work world. Sometimes the people who get promoted or get their ideas followed through on are not the smartest or brightest or most well-intentioned. They are the people who communicate well. And so it really fueled my passion for helping those people who are less comfortable speaking to share their ideas, to make sure that they get their due and that they can have the influence that they need. So when an opportunity presented itself in a certain company I worked for had changed and transitioned, and it was clear that it was time for many of us to leave, I went back to my passion. In fact, I taught high school for 2 years, and boy, did I learn a lot. Uh, I learned so much about teaching, so much about connecting. Teaching high school, I then taught at a community college, and through various hooks and crooks, I ended up at Stanford's business school, where I've been now for 12 years. And it's been a wonderful journey and one that I'm very passionate about.
Outstanding. So when you were teaching at the high school level,
Yeah.
what did you learn about yourself as you were going through that experience, if you can think back?
I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about patience. I learned a lot about difference and how people learn. It was my first real exposure to learning differences in terms of ADHD and some mental health issues. So I learned about respect for those conditions. I learned how you have to meet people where they're at. And I learned how to collaborate with other teachers and others outside of my classroom. So it taught me probably more than I taught my students. But the one thing that I brought to the class, or really tried to bring to the class, was practical application. In anything I do, I always try to look for the practical, tactical pieces of it. So while we would read literature, I taught English and speech in high school. We would read literature, but I would take from that literature and really try to help the students see how the concepts being discussed or the way it was written could be applied to their life. And so I learned a lot about how to think through how to apply things that weren't intended necessarily to be applied directly to life. And so that was helpful too.
Yeah, I can see where you would be an amazing instructor for that reason. Not only knowing your material, but then being able to translate that in such a way that I, as a student, would be able to apply that in my life, in my own world. Often we get caught up in esoteric theories, we read books, but we don't understand the application side of it. And I think that's really the missing component, the key that allows us to truly grow as human beings.
I think you're absolutely right. And let me tell you, I was not always successful. It is hard to take a Shakespearean sonnet and convince people that it has direct application. But what I always told my students is when you're learning English, when you're learning literature, what you're really learning is how to communicate. And the students were able to get that. They understood that communication was important. And just like math teaches you critical thinking skills and science teaches you inquiry skills. So when you up level it to the meta goal of the discipline, the students were able to connect to it better.
I love that. So, I was thinking about, as I was researching and preparing for our conversation, I was thinking about my own challenges that I faced when it comes to self-doubt and not believing in myself, and some of the things that I dealt with and continue to go through, right? I'm a work in progress, just like most of us are.
Yes.
But there was a time, Matt, where I would hide in the back of a classroom where I absolutely did not want to raise my hand. I didn't want the teacher to call on me. I certainly didn't want to stand in front of the class.
Right.
And so I think about that, and I told myself a story that just played as a loop over and over again, that I'm not the kind of person who can do XYZ. I'm not the kind of person who can speak in front of a group. I'm not the kind of person who can share my ideas. So that has a lot to do with belief. And beliefs obviously affect our behaviors and the way that we show up to the world. What is something that you believed about yourself early in life that you discovered later wasn't true?
So, and I still struggle with this. a fair amount of imposter syndrome, and that's something that I had as a kid, growing up and all through my early 20s and 30s. And to this day, I still struggle with this issue. This issue that I I'm not who people see me as, and in what I do, it can be true. I mean, I wrote a book on managing anxiety and speaking. I wrote a book on how to speak better in the moment, and people, I feel, expect me to be amazingly perfect in those things, and I'm not. I mean, no human is. And so I feel some of that self-doubt. So um, there was that it was much stronger and more intense as I was younger. And over time, with practice, with repetition, with reflection, I've come to feel more comfortable and confident in those skills, but I still occasionally have doubt. And I think that's good, actually. I think it's motivational. I think it reminds us that there's more to learn. Again, going back to your question about the martial arts, when I got my first black belt, my sensei, my instructor, looked at me, said, "Thank you, congratulations, you've done very well. Now let's get started." And that was a total mind shift for me. It's like I'd been working so hard for this belt, and to realize that it was just the beginning was humbling but fantastic, and it opened up a whole new world. And my my challenges and issues around imposter syndrome or feeling inadequate in certain areas in certain domains, I think is motivational. I'm doing much better than I was. I've been able to help others, I think, but it is something I still deal with.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that. And I remind myself, now I have the benefit of time. I have the benefit of experience and more knowledge.
Right.
And I'm able to look back. And when you talk about reflection, when we talk about self-reflection, I'm able to, at least when those feelings come up, I can remind myself of progress that I've made. I can look back and I can say, you did do this, you attempted this, and you were able to move through it. You can do this. You've proven to yourself. So I focus today more on progress than I do on some version of perfection, which then I go down
Yeah.
the trap of comparison. And as
Yes.
opposed to doing that, I always encourage people to, if you're going to compare yourself, only compare yourself to who you were and what you're capable of doing, and work toward that to improve your potential.
What a wonderful mindset. I really like that. And thank you for sharing that. I had a boss once, the best boss I ever had, and she had this saying that she would tell us when we were all struggling, and this was back when I was in high tech. She said, "So often we're swimming towards some distant island that looks beautiful and wonderful, and we rarely turn around to see how far we've come from the shore." And that notion of reflecting on the change that you've had is really beneficial. And so I appreciate what you said, and it reminded me of her advice. And I try to bring that into my daily life as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So you co-teach
Yeah.
a class at Stanford continuing studies
Mhm.
program
Yes.
where you use improv
Hmm.
to learn to speak more spontaneously. I would love it if you would tell us about that, and then maybe give us an example of one of the teaching methods that you would use that we could benefit from.
Happy to talk about this class. I have been teaching this class for almost a decade and a half with my colleague Adam Tobin. He's a phenomenal improviser. He's a screenwriter. He teaches at Stanford as well. Super great guy, and he's taught me a lot about improv. Most of what I know. And we came together because of this desire to help people speak better in the moment. And I came with that need, and Adam was introduced to me through a friend, and we started talking about how we could blend improvisation, which is, many people when they think of improv think of, oh, I have to be funny. Improv is not about being funny. Improv is about being present, being responsive, following some structure and rules. And in this class, we help people see the potential of their communication through doing what are, in some ways, silly little games that can really help. Let me share one example. Many people see speaking in general, but specifically spontaneous speaking, as threatening, as a challenge, as a crucible they have to deal with. And improv has a way of reframing that. And part of what can help people, the academic research shows that if you have a growth mindset, an opportunistic mindset, when it comes to communication and life in general, you can actually grow and adapt more easily. So Adam taught me this game, and we play it with our students. It's called Give a Gift. So you partner up with somebody, and one of you gives an imaginary gift to the other. Upon receiving the imaginary gift, the partner opens it up, physically, pantomiming, and looks into the box and immediately looks at their partner and thanks them for whatever came into their mind. It's a spontaneity creativity game. So you could say turtle, you could say jumbo jet, you could say molecule of water, doesn't matter. So the spontaneity of the gift opener is to name what's in the box. And then the person who gave the gift, immediately upon hearing what they gave, will explain why they gave that gift. So there's a second act of spontaneity. And when we play this game, it is amazing, Jay, to watch. Everybody is so excited. People are leaning in. What did I give? What did I give? And they respond. So if you said, thanks for the turtle, Matt, I might say, Jay, I got you this turtle because I know you're into the martial arts. I know you like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Every fan needs to have a turtle. So all of a sudden we have this spontaneous interaction. And then what Adam and I do is, in the debriefing of the activity, we ask people, how did that feel? Were you nervous? Were you stressed? People are like, no, it was a lot of fun. And then we say, what if at the end of a presentation during the Q&A session, you saw those questions coming your way as gifts rather than as threats and challenges? And some people have an epiphany in that moment, and others really cogitate on that and think about it. But that's the kind of thing we do, where we give an experience in a silly way, in a non-stressful, non-threatening way. And then we try to draw connections to known communication research to help people understand, in terms of mindset, in terms of messaging, in terms of presence, what they can do to feel more comfortable and confident. And it's a lot of fun. It is the most fun I ever had teaching. I have learned so much from my students, from my co-teacher. It's a phenomenal experience.
I love that. Do you find that when you're first starting these exercises and the classes has just begun, let's say the students are coming together for the first time, do they get stuck with trying to come up with the response quickly?
Yeah. And in fact, we use that absolutely. So to dive deeper into this game, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, we'll explain it, and then we'll say, okay, time out. How many of you already know what's in the box? And people, almost everybody says, oh, right. And this highlights how much we plan and we attempt and we create and we stockpile. And we make the point that there are times absolutely in your life where you should do that. You should plan, you should prepare. But at the same time, there are other opportunities where planning and stockpiling actually get in the way of you actually being in the moment and responding. I'll give you an example. This happened to me. I was coming out of a meeting with a colleague, and the colleague turned to me and said, Matt, how do you think that went? How do you think that meeting went? So what I heard in my brain is give feedback. So I gave constructive feedback. You talked too long. We didn't go deep enough in this. I thought people got bored at this point. What I missed was being present and really listening, because what the person needed at the moment was support. He felt like he was beat up, like the meeting didn't go well. He was feeling down. What did I do? I piled on a whole bunch of negative feedback because I thought that's what he needed. I wasn't present. I had stockpiled. I heard feedback and I immediately started going through all the things I'd been thinking about. So we help people to unpack, and sorry for the pun there, but to unpack what they're carrying around with them. And that can help. And that's part of what gets in our own way. We judge, we stockpile, and that's what prevents us from being successful in some of these games and in our communication in general.
That is so interesting. So let me ask you, in the example that you just gave, where you had given feedback and just continued to pile on, were there both verbal and physical cues that were given that you didn't pick up on?
In retrospect, thinking about it, and as I was writing this book, that this really stuck in my mind. Absolutely. So what did he do? He did several things. One, his tone was a little muted. He didn't make eye contact as he was speaking with me. He purposely left. There were two doors in this room. He left through one that nobody else went through, and I followed him. Everybody else went out the other way. These are all signs that something was amiss, and I chose not to pay attention to them. I wasn't present, and I clicked into this way of acting. Academics call these heuristics that I enacted without being present. So yeah, I missed a whole bunch of cues and clues that I should have paid attention to.
This is so incredibly important. I think about the number of times that I've given feedback, that I've received feedback, and
Mhm.
quite frankly, I mean, there have been too many times to count
Yes.
where the feedback that I gave after the fact, I said to myself, why did I do what I did? Had I really been, to your point, in the moment and paying attention and understanding what this
Mhm.
person across from me needed from me,
Yeah.
my response would have been very different. And so when that happens and we experience something like that, whether it's from a leadership perspective or in a family setting, how can we address and recover from that as opposed to beating ourselves up as an example? How do we take away a key learning from that
Mhm.
that we can use the next time to improve and get better?
I assume many of your listeners and you are familiar with this notion of growth mindset or fixed mindset. Carol Dweck,
Carol Dweck. Yeah.
she teaches at Stanford. Wonderful theory, wonderful person. One of the things she talks about in growth, having a growth mindset, is this concept of not yet. And this is a really powerful concept. And again, goes back to the martial arts. There are things that I've been trying to learn in the martial arts for years, years and years. And I've adopted this mindset of not yet. Doesn't mean not possible, won't happen. It just means not yet. And when it comes to giving feedback that doesn't go well or any communication that really doesn't go well, I encourage everybody to just step back and give yourself a little grace. We're not perfect. We're trying our best. And we say to ourselves, not yet. That wasn't the best. I can learn from it. And reflection is really key. What worked? What didn't work? Look for those things. Otherwise, we fall victim to that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So, reflection and this attitude of not yet, that's okay. I can gain those skills in the future. And one way to do that is through reflection. That's a hard lesson for me and for many people. I am a ruminator. I will stew and ruminate on things and think about how could I have done it better. But this not yet mindset has been helpful. There's another mindset I talk about in the book as well. Both of my children, I have two boys, they played basketball. They did martial arts, but also basketball as well. And there's this wonderful notion in basketball, and it applies to all sports, of next play. If you ruminate, if you stagnate, especially in a game like basketball where it transitions very quickly, if you're sitting there ruminating, oh, I should have made that shot better, or maybe something positive happened, like, oh, I made a great shot, I'm the best ever, you're missed already what's happening next. So between not yet, meaning I'm not ready yet, but I can get there, and reminding yourself that you have to move on and not ruminate because you can miss good things happening. Between those two mindsets, I think you can really fundamentally help yourself grow and not feel bad about yourself.
Oh my gosh, that is so powerful. And for those that are watching and listening right now, I want you to think about this. I certainly hope you're taking notes because there's some great information that's being shared here. But Matt, you just shared 4 words, simple words, yet profound in their context, their meaning, and the change that occurs when you apply them. So, for all of you, make sure you go back and re listen to this particular point in the conversation because you are spot on. And this is something that I'm working on myself because, like what you just mentioned, that rumination, that continuing to play that negative loop over and over again and trying to think through this or saying, why did I do this? That doesn't help us. But when we learn to pause, to reflect, to take a step back, get better perspective, next play,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
moves us forward as opposed to holding us back. So
Exactly right.
so powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
So you've referenced this, and I want to dive into your latest book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter.
Mm-hmm.
What an amazing, amazing book. And I love the title. So, this book is all about how we can learn to speak successfully when we're put on the spot.
Mhm.
And you provide research-based tools and strategies and real-world examples. This goes back to you being the effective teacher, the lecturer, the person who not only provides the information, right, but then gives the practical and applicable things that we can do to put these into practice. So it's such an amazing book. So I would love it if you would walk us through a couple. Obviously, in our time together, we can't deep dive into each section of the book, but we will certainly provide a link where our audience can purchase a copy. But share just a couple key insights from the book that, as you were doing the research to put this book together, that were some of those aha moments, some of those this is so insightful. I'd love to hear from your perspective what some of those areas and key insights are.
So let me answer this question in two ways, because I want to give sort of a high level overview of the process and the book talks about, but I want to pull out some really key, interesting interviews that I had that I just found totally fascinating. So the book is really divided into two sections. The first section is about mindset and messages. How do we get the right mindset so that we can be comfortable, confident, and present in these spontaneous speaking situations? And then I also talk about messages. How do we craft messages that are concise, clear, and compelling and focused? That's the first part of the book. The second part of the book looks at 6 very specific situations we find ourselves in spontaneous speaking, answering questions, making apologies, making small talk, etc., and gives advice and guidance on how to do those well, leveraging what happened in the first part of the book. So in researching that, I got to talk to just some amazing people. I spoke with neuroscientists who taught me the value of using different modalities in your communication. So using an analogy, sharing some numbers, telling a story, and how it spins up different brain systems to help engage your audience more. I talked with a book editor for the Dummies book series. I think all of us have seen those Dummies books, and their attitude towards how we do what they call wayfinding. How do we guide somebody through our material to help them get to the same place we are? If you've ever looked at one of those books, you can use them in like 4 or 5 different ways. And I found that fascinating. I talked to a visual artist. I don't know if you've ever seen this, where in meetings, somebody's actually drawing pictures that capture what's going on in the meeting in real time. And we talked about pattern recognition. How in the moment can she be understanding what's being said and translate into terms and images that people can see? So a lot of those had really important impact on me. And I'll tell you, the bottom line in all of this is twofold. You've got to be present and audience focused. If you're in the moment and focusing on the needs of your audience, that will help. And if you provide structure that packages up your information, then you can be successful, not just in the moment speaking, but in all communication. So in all the work I did prior to this book and researching this book, those are really the key takeaway messages.
Excellent. So again, we're going to provide the link for everyone to go out and purchase a copy of this book. It's an important one and definitely one that should be in your library as a reference guide that you continue to resource and learn from. So I want to talk about one of the big topics of anxiety, of speaking in public. I believe at one point in time, you would certainly know this better than I, that public speaking was the number one fear even before death itself. Now, I don't know if that's still the case, but when I was growing up, that was something that I continued to hear. And I certainly that was a story that I was telling myself as well.
Yes.
So it certainly helped keep me out of the limelight and keep me away from the stage and speaking in front of other people. So let's talk about the anxiety that we feel when we're speaking in public and providing some very specific tools and research-based strategies that we can use to manage that anxiety that we feel. And I'll share with you some of the things that I've learned that I've been doing up to this point that have helped me as well.
I would love to hear what works for you. I'm always curious about what works for people. You're right. Anxiety is one of the top fears people report across the world in all ages, genders, backgrounds. It is ubiquitous. And those of us who study this have some theories about why that is. But the bottom line is we see speaking in front of others, we being most people, up to 85% of people report this. We see it as a threat, and our bodies and minds respond as if we're under threat, fight or flight. There are two primary categories or ways of learning to manage anxiety. And I was really pleased to hear you say the word manage. A lot of people say overcome. I don't think we can ever truly overcome our anxiety, nor do I think we'd want to. Anxiety actually can be helpful if managed well. It gives us energy, helps us focus, motivates us. So management is really important. And there are two ways to do it. One is by focusing on symptoms. That's what we experience physically and mentally. And then there's sources, things that initiate and exacerbate the anxiety. So if you'll allow me, I'll give one example of each.
Please.
One of the things that happens right away when we go into fight or flight, in any situation, but especially speaking, our heart starts beating faster and we breathe more quickly and shallow. Your body's very smart. It's trying to give itself energy to protect itself. So the faster your heart beats, the faster you breathe, the more oxygenated your blood becomes. This causes great agitation. And speaking, it can cause us to speak quicker. The faster you breathe, the faster you speak. It can cause your voice to sound more quivery or higher register. So the single best thing you can do, if you said, Matt, you can only give me one technique for managing anxiety, and I wrote a book that covers 50 of them, but if you said only one, I would say it's deep breathing, deep belly breaths, the kind you would do if you've ever done yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong, these deep belly breaths. And what this does is it slows down your autonomic nervous system. And interestingly, on the podcast I host, I learned from a neuroscientist and expert that it's not the inhalation that's important, it's the exhale. So I like to joke the rule of thumb or the rule of lung is your exhale should be twice as long as your inhale. So deep breathing can slow down your heart rate. The lower, slower breathing slows down your speaking rate, makes your voice sound more like your own, and it can help you feel control in that situation. There are many other things we can do to manage symptoms. Happy to chat with you about those if you wish. I want to switch to sources. Many of us are made nervous by many things. One of the main factors that makes us nervous is the goal we're trying to achieve. When we communicate, we have a goal. It might be, I want to look smart, or I want to get this job, or I want the funding or support. And what makes us nervous is our fear of not achieving that goal, which by definition is a fear of a potential negative future outcome. So it's about the future, and the way to short circuit anxiety that originates in our fear of the future, our fear of a goal not being attained, is to become present oriented. And there are lots of ways to do that. Deep breathing is a good one. Doing something physical is a good one. Listening to music like athletes do before they perform. Starting at 100 and counting backwards by some challenging number like 17s, that can get you present oriented. I personally say tongue twisters before I speak. You can't say a tongue twister right, not be in the present moment. It also warms up my voice. Before you and I got on this call today, I said my favorite tongue twister a few times just to warm up and get present oriented. So these are just examples of how we can manage both symptoms and sources to help our anxiety.
That is so good. So a couple of questions to bolt on to what you said for some clarification. Number one, on the breathing technique.
Yes.
Do you recommend, is it an inhalation through the nose, through the mouth? And what about the exhalation?
Yes. So there is some research that suggests nose breathing is better than open mouth breathing. But there are, for some reasons, who people prefer to breathe, mouth breathe. Any breathing is better. Any deep breathing is better than no deep breathing. In through the nose, out through the nose is what I do. It's what I recommend. But like I said, any kind of deep breathing is a good thing.
Excellent. And then what is the tongue twister that you recited prior to our recording this podcast?
Will you do it with me? Will you
I
do it
would be
responsibly?
happy to.
You're going to put me on the spot. So the reason I like this one, I teach this one to my students because I say it's 3 phrases, 5 seconds. And if you say it wrong, you say a naughty word. And that engages all my students because they're like, what's the naughty word? So repeat after me, Jay. I slit a sheet.
I slit a sheet.
A sheet I slit.
A sheet I slit.
And on that slitted sheet I sit.
and on that slitted sheet I sit.
Congratulations. You said it well, and you did not say the naughty word. I'll leave it to your listeners to try to think about what that naughty word might have been.
Excellent. Now, is that the pace at which you would normally say that as you're
Uh,
warming up your vocal cords?
no, I will say it 3 times very quickly, but I have gotten to a point where I can say that one very fluently. So it's the key to doing this is to try to say it right and articulate your words. So as you're learning a tongue twister or whatever you want to say, slower at first makes sense. I've been doing this for a long, long time, so I'll say it very quickly, but it serves the same purpose.
Excellent. So, how has, from your experience, how has AI
Mm.
and technology changed the way that we communicate? And if I can add a second part to that, how has it changed the way that you teach communication?
So AI is very, very intriguing to me. I see huge benefits and some pretty significant, scary challenges with it. On the podcast I host, I actually interviewed generative AI. I typed in questions to ChatGPT, and then we used text to voice, so you can hear me having a conversation with it. And it was fascinating what it said. So I think generative AI can help us in many ways. Let me give you some examples when it comes to our communication. It can help us brainstorm. In other words, we can take ideas and follow them through a little more quickly than we could normally. We can have it generate questions for us. If you're preparing for an interview, you can go to a generative AI and say, I'm interviewing for this position at this company. Give me 5 questions that are reasonable. And then all of a sudden you can practice those questions. So it has the potential to really help. I have lots of non-native speakers of English. Generative AI can help them find the right vocabulary, become more fluent. Again, I'm not saying to script everything out and read it, but it has these benefits. As a teacher, I have used generative AI to help with examples. I think one of the best ways to learn communication is through examples. And I have always worked hard to generate several examples, but it takes time and I can't cover all the bases I'd like to cover. So I've had generative AI help me. So for example, in one of my strategic communication classes, we do an activity where I have people draft an email about a certain challenging situation. And we're talking about how to be concise, how to convey emotion in your communication in writing. And I've always given a few examples. Well, I now have at least 3 times more examples than I used to have because I leveraged generative AI to help me at least start that process. So lots of opportunity for both teaching and for our communication, but lots of challenges around creativity, around correctness and veracity. So, the jury from my perspective is still out, but I think it is a fascinating tool and will fundamentally change how we communicate.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that. And continuing to look for ways to incorporate it in the work that I do, as
Yep.
well as remove the fear
Mhm.
behind it and look for ways to learn from it, maximize it, and use it to the benefit of the greater good where it can. So thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing that.
Yeah.
So you ask 3 questions of each of your guests at the end of your podcast. And by the way, to my friends listening and watching right now, I'm going to link to Matt's podcast as well. It is a fantastic one. So definitely sure you subscribe to his. And I would love it if you would ask or answer those 3 questions. And here they are. So we're turning the tables on you.
Okay. Happy to.
So I'm going to phrase this slightly differently than you do, but share the best communication advice you've received as a 5 to 7 word presentation title.
Tell the time, don't build the clock. My mother, it's not her quote. We don't know who said it, but she's told me and my brother this our entire lives. We can be verbose at times. Many of us give much more information than we should or need to in a certain circumstance. We need to tell the time rather than build the clock. So it's all about being concise and clear.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. Second question: who's a communicator that you admire and why?
I know I put all of my guests on the spot with this because it can be very, very hard to come up with this, and it certainly is challenging for me. There's a woman named Brittany Packnett, young woman. She is all about confidence, not just the confidence I look at, which is the confidence in communication. She's just about how to be confident in life. She has some amazing talks online. She does a lot of good stuff in her writing. And what I appreciate is she conveys emotion, authenticity, passion, yet at the same time with a credibility that is palpable. And I just enjoy learning from her, watching her, and seeing how she puts many of the things I talk about and teach into practice. So Brittany Packnett is somebody I admire very much.
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And the third question that you ask is, what are the first three ingredients that go into a successful communication recipe?
Well, I've highlighted some of these in our previous conversation, Jay, but it's first and foremost audience. It has you are in service of your audience, so you have to know them, you have to understand what will be beneficial to them. Second, you need to be present. You need to be in the moment so you can respond to what's needed. And then finally, you need to leverage structure to help you package the information for your audience, but also to help you package your thoughts. So if you're audience centric, present, and leveraging structure, you can go a long way in both planned and spontaneous speaking.
Brilliant. So before I ask my final question to you,
Yes.
I would love it if you would leave our audience with a challenge. What would you challenge us to do?
I would challenge everybody. It's a two-part challenge. I want everybody to think about a recent communication you had. I don't care if it went well or didn't go well. And I want you to itemize two things that were strengths about this, two things that you felt went really well, and then two things to strengthen, two things that you think you could do better on, and get into this habit of reflection. And then the second part of the challenge is the next time you communicate, change the way you communicate in some way that is consistent with supporting the strengths you identified and adjusting and adapting to the things that you wanted to strengthen. The only way we get better at anything in life, but especially communication, is three things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. You have to practice, you have to reflect, and then you have to ask others for feedback. And the reflection piece is hardest for most people.
That is so good. And I journal as a
Mm-hmm.
way of reflecting and reflecting on the day, what went well, what didn't go well, areas that I want to work on. So I appreciate that. I'm going to take that challenge as well and continue to dig deeper. So thank you for that. And
Mm-hmm.
here's my final question to you. What is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person who you've become?
I'm going to go with the first thing that came to my mind. I'm not sure it's the most difficult, but when I was graduating high school, we started talking about my high school career at the very first day. We'll talk about when I was leaving. I had to choose a path. I was very fortunate to get into a very exclusive film school. I thought I wanted to be a producer director, and at that moment, that was a passion. I all through high school, I did all this films, and I had to choose if I wanted to go or not. And I chose not to go. And it was the best decision I've ever made. But at the same time, it's one of those decisions where if I could get a glimpse into that alternate reality of what life would have been like, I'm just really curious. So that was the first thing that came to mind. Perhaps not the most significant decision I made, but it was one that set me up for the success that I had. I met my wife, started my family, got to have the career that I just love as a result of that decision. And so that's the one that first comes to mind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Yeah.
Matt, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I appreciate you being fully present, sharing of your knowledge, your wisdom, sharing so many incredible insights, and being the outstanding communicator and teacher that you are, and then also for bringing think faster, talk smarter to life for the rest of us. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jay. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And thank you all for watching and listening. And I do have a favor. would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us grow this podcast and continue to attract amazing guests just like Matt. As a matter of fact, why don't you go to his podcast, subscribe, rate, and do exactly the same thing? Leave a review there for him as well. I know he'd appreciate that. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com/podcast. Click on that podcast button. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of Think Faster, Talk Smarter, and apply the lessons you learn. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.